Hi, everybody. Steve Cady here at Bowling Green State University with our Doctorate in Organization Development and Change program symposia series. And I'm really grateful to you all for being here today and being a part of this. We have some of our students from our master's program, from our doctoral program, and we have guests and friends that are here and that are part of this with us. And one of the things I want to share with you all is that our doctorate is about thought leadership in service of something that's greater than any one of us. And I think what draws us to the session today and what draws us to this work is, as one of our faculty members said at a recent change conference, that we are all yes babies. And what he says that he said a person he was speaking with said that, when you're born, all babies have a choice. They're asked, you want to be of service to the world, and some babies say yes, and they choose a life of service. And I think you all are here because you're yes babies. You've chosen a life of service, and that's what draws you to this topic and this work that we do. And there's Kelly. Hey, Kelly O'Brien, good to see you. So I am really excited about this today. So Tanya, your program and what you've developed is an inspiration on a couple fronts. One, it's a really important cause. We take our doctoral program over to Europe. And what's interesting is when we go to Amsterdam, we work with two community organizations. One of them is an organization to help people that are refugees coming into the Netherlands, particularly a lot of people out of Syria who lost all their educational credentials and don't know how to keep their education going. There's the person who founded it was a doctor, had done all the schooling, came to the Netherlands and had to start over essentially because everything was lost. All the paperwork, all the certification, everything was lost. And so in that, it's grown to 1,000 people to come, and they help them figure out how to get their education on track. And they work with this system locally and the education systems and stuff like that. So when I was reading your website and reading about your work, I was like, it's really connected. And also for us, we live on a farm, and one of our houses, a Ukrainian family that was brought in and sponsored by a church was just brought in. They moved into that house, and they're working to learn English. They're working to do all kinds of things. And there's a lot of people popping over there helping them. I see a lot of people that are really there to support them. And it's really, from that place of service. So we are fortunate in a world that is so, full of strife right now, that we have lots of good people doing good things like you are. So Sarah said, hey, I have someone to speak today. And Sarah was like, I really would love to have Tanya come and talk and share what she's doing and what she's about. So Sarah, if you could tell us a little bit about Tanya's work. Sarah, if you could tell us and introduce Tanya from your perspective. How'd you learn about her? What is it that she does? What impresses you about what she's built, and so forth? Just help us learn a little bit about Tanya from your
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. So for those of you who don't know, I'm Sarah Klein, and I'm a student in the doctoral program. And I also work for the city of Cuyahoga Falls. I serve as the Parks and Recreation Superintendent. And I met Tanya initially through an initiative that our city was doing in collaboration with the county, Summit County, to really make sure that we have welcoming communities and a welcoming workforce. And it's really initially born out of the fact that there are many jobs that need filled at all levels and many people who need jobs. And the intersection of the international newcomer community, which is quite large in Akron and Cuyahoga Falls, we're a suburb of Akron, and the employers that are looking for people, and we wanted to bring them together. And I have the good fortune to serve on the steering committee for this project for the city of Cuyahoga Falls. And Tanya and I have had really great conversations about ways to not only look at the economic impact and how to fill positions that need done, but also how do we make our park system welcoming? How do we make our community welcoming? And it really does fit in well with organization change. It really is all about how do you change a culture? How do you make sure a culture incorporates lots of different perspectives and viewpoints and be respectful and still feel authentic and still feel like home to everyone. And so I really did think that Tanya would be a great fit for our symposia series. And so here she is. So I will introduce Tanya Budler from Rise Together.
Awesome.
So Tanya,
thanks so much, Sarah. And thanks, Dr. Caddy, for having me.
You're welcome. So you woke up one morning and you thought, I'm going to do this.
I wish it was that sudden, but I think that, and I've talked to a few of you on this call about this before, I think that if you looked at where I started to where I am now, it doesn't make any sense. This is a pretty atypical path. And so just the beginning point is I was originally born in Nebraska, and our hometown was 500 people, and myself, my siblings, my cousins were the first generation of non-farmers in family history. So often people, if they know that piece of my story, wonder how in the world did I end up here? And I would like to say that I had a perfect plan, but there was a day when I woke up, into how you began your remarks, realized that if you have the choice to serve and you have the ability to serve, then you should. And I'm happy to go into more detail, but there was a perfect moment in life in which the thing I was good at is what the thing that people wanted.
Yeah, tell us the story. Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah. I actually don't always tell this one part of the story. And since you mentioned Europe, I'll actually share kind of the significant turning point that then led to me going to grad school and starting Rise Together. So I grew up on a farm, and my parents didn't go to college, but we had just this really loving environment. And if there's one thing that's so powerful about small towns, is you quickly learn that idea of being my brother's keeper. And everybody looked out for everyone, whether it's mowing their lawn or picking their kid up from school. And so from a very early age, this sense of belonging or strong community was a part of who I am. But the small town got a little too small. So when I was 16, I did a high school exchange year, and I lived in Italy. And even though I was struggling to learn the language and fit into a new culture, what I realized is that belonging is also a significant part of their world. And that if I did a few different things, I could feel like I belonged there too. That led me to then deciding to study the Middle East and Arabic in college and move away from home again. And even when I was living over there, the red thread once more was this sense of belonging, and that it didn't matter where you were from, what language you spoke, what religion you practice. Everybody could have this sense of belonging. And more importantly, this notion of my brother's keeper existed across cultures. So as important as it was in Doniphan, Nebraska, population 500, that sense of taking care of each other, I also saw in Modena, Italy, and Sharjah in the Emirates, and in New Hampshire and Boston, and in all the other places that I've gotten the chance to go to. We really do have to take care of each other, because we all have something to give. And I think that I realized kind of my calling to this space very profoundly early on in my career. It was actually my second month in my first job. And I was in Europe for work. They took us to Berlin, and we were with a bunch of educators, helping them understand sort of what the education system looked like in Germany, Poland, and Czech Republic. And one of our tour guides came up to me and he said, Tanya, I heard you speak some Arabic. This was back when I did speak some Arabic. And so I said, yeah, a little bit, I can dabble. And he said, do you want to come with me? Because I've been volunteering at this refugee shelter, and we're just having a couple disconnects, and I'd love to be able to really talk to these men. And so I was very nervous, because I had never used my language for others. It had kind of always been just for me to make friends or do whatever I wanted. And so I went with him, and we went to this shelter, and we started to speak to the individuals there and hear their really, really scary stories. And as you were talking about, of mostly Syrians in the Netherlands, they were mostly Syrians. This was the peak of the crisis in 2015. And very quickly we realized there's power in understanding what others are going through. And so we invited them to join us that evening, because on our agenda, we had scheduled kind of a discussion with our educators in the dead zone between the East and the West, or what used to be East and West Berlin. And it was already going to be an intense night, but we thought maybe we should have some refugees come and share their stories, because I doubt most of our American teachers read the news and see what we're seeing. And so we did, and they showed up. Honestly, I wasn't sure if they would, but they showed up, and I get goosebumps just thinking about it, because that was one of the most profound nights of my entire life. I was 22 years old, maybe. And I stood up there with 5 men from Syria and Afghanistan and Egypt, and helped live translate their stories to these American educators. And I'll never forget this one time, one of the guys was telling us how he got from Syria to Europe. And he said a word, and I knew the word. And I looked at him and I said, did you say this? And he said, yes, I did. And he said he swam. across the sea because there weren't boats and he had no choice. He just couldn't wait anymore. And I promised myself I wouldn't cry when I was telling their stories because it's not my story, it's theirs. But we got through telling their stories and the gentleman left and the teachers left and it was just myself and my colleagues left in the cafe. And I walked to the back of the coffee shop and I looked at one of my dear friends and teammates and he said, "Are you okay?" And I just like crumbled because I think it was the first time in my life I realized that it's a flip of a coin that I lived the life that I live, that it could have been that I was born in Syria and was 22 running by foot to get safety and security for my family, like a young man who was 20 who was with us shaking because he hadn't eaten in so many days. And then I was on this like bougie work trip staying in like the nice part of downtown Berlin. So that was the transformative moment that then led to many things. But I don't often get to share that story, nor do I often share it. But it really, you have those moments that when you think of, you're like, wow, my whole world changed in that night. And that's why a farm kid is interested in refugees.
What did you see after that day that you hadn't seen before? How did the world look to you after that night?
Yeah, that's a great question. I imagine many people on this call have felt this way too. I feel like when you have a transformative moment, there's a lot of feelings. Like first it's confusion and then maybe a little anger. Like I was also raised pretty religiously, so I got angry. I was like, how does this exist in the world? But what it did is it made me realize that, again, it's luck that we are born where we are born, and that we have the safety and security that we do. And so that's where the notion of taking care of each other really comes in. In one way, it made me realize the world is so big and there's a lot happening, but it also made me realize the world is so small and we really need to be looking out for each other.
Yeah, there's a concept called generative psychology, which focuses on how people take whatever circumstances that they're in and they use it as inspiration. They use it as helping them to become better in who they are. And what I find interesting is I was talking with one Ukrainian young lady when I was over in Amsterdam, and we were sitting on the side and she was listening to the Syrians because she was working as a intern with a firm we were working with and learning with. And then they came to the session that we did with the nonprofit that was serving mostly Syrians, but people through the Edu4U. So she came to the session, she was listening to their stories. And one of the guys was telling a story about, being in a small little boat and barely making it across, and those kinds of things. And she's listening to the story and then she just got up and had to walk out. It was really too emotional for her. And I walked outside and, at some point I talked with her and she said, there are some things people should just not have to go through to become a better person. You can take a generative approach to whatever happens and say, well, it informs us and it makes us a better person. It's almost like sympathy versus empathy. In the sense that, you can say that, it's nice to say intellectually, but some of the stuff just, you don't need it to become a better person.
No, not at all. And we really just shouldn't have it, right? We don't need it and we shouldn't have it. And I think that what I've been very humbled by is I do come from a part of the country that's pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I'm actually staying at my sister's house right now, helping watch my nephews. And we often reflect on that we are one generation away from abject poverty. Like our parents grew up with nothing and they fought to give us the beginning of a life for us to get what we have. And so that's what we were raised on, is that you can overcome any of your circumstances. But what we've been talking a lot about is that, but you shouldn't have to crawl a mountain that's like this steep. And I work with a lot of teenagers, or I used to work with a lot of teenagers. And I promise you, if you talk to these kids, you see that they shouldn't have to have seen the violence and the pain and the horror that they have. So I agree with you. Yes, it builds character, but to what extent?
Right. And the thing is there are some challenges that are blessings, and there are some challenges that we have to recover from and heal from. And I think a lot of times people look at their hardships and the challenges that they have. And as you look at it, how do you reconcile talking to someone who has a challenge, and you might differentiate challenges? Like there are challenges and then there are challenges, but there are some things like like we have students in our programs and they're studying and they got homework and they've got tasks and projects, or they're working in a company, got this huge project and lots of stuff demands and there's a lot of pressure. How do you differentiate that from the kinds of challenges that you are helping people with?
Yeah, and this, and I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later of the mechanics of how we do systems level change. But I think what I found to be really important for me in the way that I interact with others is that everyone deserves to have their mountain. And it doesn't matter if someone else's mountain makes yours look like a molehill. Like everyone deserves to have their mountain, and allow people to sit in that is super important, because I think comparative suffering, we talked about Brene Brown before the call started, comparative suffering is very, very harmful to building community and to taking care of each other. And I think what I have found for building welcoming communities and this sense of belonging is allow everyone to have their mountain. And it might be that they're super stressed as a grad student, and that challenge is as important to them in that moment as it is when we're working with refugees who are dealing with some serious trauma. But that's sort of the approach I've been taking. And I know it can be quite hard. And I'll tell you, I went through some challenges of losing a parent very early in life. And there were some days that someone would come to me with something so little, and in my head, I wanted to be like, this is so not important. But again, recenter, allow yourself. Everyone's allowed to have their mountain.
Yeah, it definitely is relative. So you decided to create this organization, and we talked a little bit earlier about everybody has a dream in their heart, a thing that they want to, how they want to help the world be a better place. Like all of us have a book in our head, like a lot of people say, I have a book to write. I got a book, and we all have, and some of us write it and some of us don't. Some of us create what you've created and some of us don't. Could you speak a little bit about what helps that transition from thinking about this and then going to making it become reality? What is it about that maybe 1 out of 100 or 1,000 people might actually do it versus those that don't? Is there something in that experience you had that was really pivotal to turning your idea into a reality that you think is important to share?
Yeah, and I have to say that I'm somebody who reflects a lot, and I journal, and I take like voice note journals, and I, for the life of me, cannot find the moment I decided to do this. I've been asked this question a few times, and I cannot find it anywhere. I wish I did. I wish I had captured the moment that I decided, okay, you're going to do this, because I'm not really sure what it was, if not just this deep sense of, you have to. And again, my girl Brene Brown, and one of my favorite things or favorite quotes from her is, choose the great adventure of being brave and afraid at the exact same time. And I don't think I chose to do this because I thought it would be easy. I think I chose to do this because it was really kind of like that sweet spot. If you've ever heard them talk about, Bill George has the sweet spot, or it's kind of like the Japanese principle of, what is it? Ikigai, I think is what it is, the principle of happiness. And it's when you find a moment in your life in which the thing you're uniquely good at overlaps with something you love, overlaps with a problem people are trying to solve, and people are willing to pay for it, like that is it. That's the sweet spot in life. And I remember I was in grad school at the time, and I remember I was sitting in a class and they were talking about the sweet spot as a public policy and leadership class. And it just like hit me of, oh, wow, okay, maybe there's something here. I don't know what led from that to all of a sudden deciding to move to a state that I have no connections to, but it was kind of this feeling of, I have to seize this moment. And I think a little bit of a ridiculous confidence and faith that it could work. And I think that is what I notice is missing sometimes, is people have big dreams, but they're afraid it won't work. And let me just give you a quick anecdote, because Mary's on the call and some other folks from Cuyahoga Falls. We just hosted an event on Friday in the Falls, International Student Career Fair. And we put it together in about 3.5 weeks. And I was my fatal optimist self, like, it's going to work, like students are going to show up. And I'll tell you, deep down inside, I was like, what if this doesn't work? And it's what I woke up thinking is, there's a chance this won't work, but I want to believe that it will. And within the first 15 minutes, and we had almost 20 people, I looked at Mary and Diana from the city and I said, thank you for trusting me. There was a part of me that was worried it wouldn't work, but it did. So thank you. And so I do think it's this, you have to have more faith that it could work than fear that it won't.
Right on. And as you think about the actual setting up of your organization, you have a few things that you can share about what you did and how you make the case, and talk a little bit more. So if you want to cue that up, and you can to share. And what I'd like to do is, for everybody that's here, what's the question that you're curious about, or what is your curiosity that you have? If you could put it in the chat, we'd love to see some of your curiosities, questions or things that you have. If you could put it in the chat. And so Tanya, yeah, so share with us and show us a little bit about this. And I think the essence, what would you say these next slides, what is the question that it answers? These slides answer.
Yeah, I think what it gets at is what is that, if we did the triangle here, what is the problem that people are trying to solve and they're willing to pay for? And then what is it that I uniquely bring to the table? And I think the model of Rise Together as an impact firm that uses collective impact, sort of a systems change model, is a little bit unique in the newcomer space. We haven't found many people who are doing it this way. And so that's what I'm hoping you all will learn or get from in the next few slides, is a bit of why is it that, again, this Midwestern heartland kid is having quite a bit of success right now in this work. So I will start with this, though, because I always like to show people a little bit of where I start from. This is our lovely home. Unfortunately, we sold it, but this is where we grew up. And as I said, I think that the red thread between living in Italy and living in the Middle East and everywhere else was you can take care of each other, and belonging is most important. But what I really want to talk about today, as I said, is the different pieces of the puzzle that make Rise Together work. And I can see the chat. So if you have questions, please interrupt me. And same with you, Dr. Patty. If you have anything, please chime in here. But today I thought I would just share a few quick pieces, the significant challenges and opportunities that come from them. What is the Welcoming Workforce Coalition, kind of the bread and butter of our business model, and what Sarah is a part of, the secret sauce, and then open discussion, of course, at the end for folks. I'm a big fan of charts, so that's what I wanted to show, some visuals in case you guys like them too. I imagine you've read the news in the last 6 months or the last year to know that we have a significant global talent shortage. And this data set came out only 4 weeks ago. And this is right now. We have a deficit of workers in the millions in all the countries in yellow. So every country in yellow is struggling to have enough workers to fill the open jobs. Now, if we fast forward in about the end of the decade in 2030, things get really drastic. So the orange is a significant deficit of workers between 6 million and 12 million. There's a few that are going to be really in some trouble. And then you'll see the rest of the world will be in some form of a deficit as well. I think what was so fascinating when I started getting into this work is it's not just a matter of us not having enough workers. This is affecting our supply chain and therefore our economy. And we will have an approximate hit to our like annual earnings as a country of 6%. So they're projecting $1.78 trillion of unactualized earnings in our country if we don't solve for this number of workers that are missing. Those of you who've interacted with me have seen this many a times. This is just for the United States. If we zoomed in, by the end of this decade, so at 2030, we'll have 80 million jobs unfilled with the current workforce. Now, the good news is there are some kids that will get older and join the workforce, but the bad news is there's not enough of them. And that is really what we see here with birth rates. And what I like about this work is hopefully none of it's surprising. I mean, we all know this, we see it, we feel it. We feel it when we go out to eat and we see all the help wanted signs when we go to order something and it takes months instead. Just to zoom in a second on this replacement rate chart, the beginning right there are baby boomers. And you all know that the boomer generation is huge. So this replacement rate is how many children are born per woman. So the boomers were closer to 4, so between 2.5 and 3.5 babies per woman. And then it dropped below 2.1. And we need 2.1 births per woman to sustain our economy with the current jobs that exist. And so you see that we sort of tiptoed to it with the millennials for a bit, my generation, but we haven't really recovered. And what they're projecting for Gen Alpha, which is the one being born right now, and then the one that's coming, is that it's going to be just above 1. And I think we need to look no further than the average birth rate or the average age of a mother right now in the United States is 30. It used to be 24. And that women are having 1 to 2 children instead of 3 to 4 to more. So there's a significant need for workers, and they're not going to happen naturally. They're not going to come from Americans. And that's why we get so excited by this, because what are the answers? It's international newcomers. Now, I actually, on the top of the call, we were talking about newcomers, and somebody said they hadn't heard that phrase before. We use the word international newcomers because it allows people to identify in any way that they want to. So that means they could be a refugee or an asylum seeker, an international student, or a highly paid or a highly skilled worker on an H-1B visa or a green card path. International newcomers have been and will continue to be the main form of population growth in our country for decades to come. And I think what I wanted to give you a snippet of, if you are somebody who likes data, is this is just kind of the Northeast Ohio, Cuyahoga County area. So their total population declined 1.6% in the last decade. But the immigrant or the newcomer population increased 3.1%. Without newcomers, Northeast Ohio would have lost a representation in the House and Senate if it wasn't for newcomers stabilizing the population. Not only do they keep us sort of consistent with our population, they contribute significantly. You know, this is a number from 2019. The newcomer households contributed $9.3 billion to Cuyahoga County's GDP. That's 9.2% of the total. That's important because they only make up 6.8% of the population, yet they contribute 9.2% of the total GDP. And as you saw earlier in the chart, that by the end of the decade, we'll have 80 million workers. And here's our answer. Newcomers are and have always been the main form of population growth in the last few decades. I thought I would transition now. And again, like, please feel free to chime in. I see the questions are more general, so we'll get to those in a minute. But I thought I would now turn to, okay, so here's our problem and here's our opportunity as newcomers, but what in the world do we actually do with them? Because if you've ever been with me, you know there's a significant difference between inclusion and belonging. And there are lots of organizations that are slotting newcomers into open jobs, but that's not enough. And that's why we build things like a Welcoming Workforce Coalition. And because Sarah invited me, and there's Sarah right in the middle actually of this picture, I thought that I would use them as an example of the work that we do. Building a Welcoming Workforce Coalition and bringing together the strongest assets of a community. So this is a picture actually of our kickoff, and I think it does a really good job at showing kind of why we do the work we do or how we do the work we do. And so this string represents what happens in all of our communities, whether you live in Cleveland, Cuyahoga Falls, or somewhere out in a different part of the country. Each part of our community is connected in some way. And often it's their kids play soccer together, or they went to church together, or they grew up together. So there's some form of connection between the strongest resources and programs of our community. But they look like this. They're a little bit loose. And what we all usually see is if it's a little bit loose, things are often to fall through those holes. And the group that often falls through are those that need the help the most, like our international newcomers. So what we do when we build a Welcoming Workforce Coalition, goal number one is to bring together the strongest assets of a community and tighten those bonds and really strengthen that web as you see here, so there aren't holes, so they're not falling through. And I could share my opinion, but there are many people from our coalition on this call, and I hope they feel like they have a stronger connection to people in our community by virtue of doing this work together. So step one that we do to build a welcoming workforce is we build this coalition to strengthen the web and to get at these three overarching goals. So increasing local awareness of the advantages of building a welcoming workforce, ensuring that the international newcomers who already live in the community, because they're all there in many communities, have all they need to thrive, and then enhance the reputation so that newcomers see this as a place where they can be accepted and have a sense of belonging. The short version of these is changing hearts and minds, retaining newcomers that are already there, and attracting more of them. Now, if it's okay, I want to actually shift to, okay, well, sure, this sounds all nice and dandy, and it sounds like it would be really cool, but how do you actually do that? And how do you do that in a climate that is very polarized, where if I were to come in and say the word immigrant, you would get some people who would immediately sit back and no longer be listening. Or if I talked about non-US workers, they might change their demeanor. How do you create a systems level change with a group of folks who are on different parts of their journey for being welcoming to newcomers? And that's where collective impact comes in. And to your point earlier about like the moment to decide to do something, I think I realized there's something that's been a part of my life my entire life, which is changing hearts and minds. As you might guess, I'm kind of the controversial one of the family. I had changing hearts and minds my whole life, but then also doing it in a way that is serving our economy and our communities. So many of you have probably seen some form of collective impact before, and this is where we get into the theory, but I promise I'll bridge it into practice here. So collective impact is based off of 5 principles. common agenda, shared measurement, mutually reinforcing activities, continuous communication, and strong backbone. I'm actually going to use the example of Cuyahoga Falls to show you what we mean by this. Common agenda, from day one, we come in and we share these 3 goals, and we make sure everyone on the coalition knows this is where we are going. It doesn't matter if you take the back road or if you take the side road or if you crawl, as long as you're going to the same endpoint, the common agenda, that's all that matters. Shared measurement. One of my advisors used to always say this quote to me: there's no point in just putting something out into the ether and not listening to the echoes. We wanted to make sure that we're measuring what we're doing, because it's not okay to just sit and come up with a strategic plan that sits on a shelf, as we've all probably seen or been a part of in different points of our lives. Mutually reinforcing activities, that's where your coalition comes in. Folks that have different strengths and different assets that they bring to the table. No need to read all this, but this is just to show you kind of all the pieces of a puzzle that make up a community like Cuyahoga Falls. The park systems, the libraries, the banks, housing, schools, elected officials, business owners, tangible assets like the natatorium, things like that. That is all of the strongest assets of a community that are all doing their individual activities, but together they can be quite strong. Continuous communication. God bless all of you, because you have heard from me probably more than you expected. A weekly email, and then these pre-planned meetings. We actually have one tonight, to constantly be in communication, because it's not okay to do systems change once a month. That's not really how we change hearts and minds. You have to continually be on people's hearts and minds. And then I think the last part, which is the most important that I've seen for systems level change, is having that strong backbone. You can't just do it because you think it matters. You need to actually have some investment of time and money and resources. And what I love about what we do with Rise Together is we give that backbone. We help create kind of that platform for people to create this change if they don't have capacity themselves. The city of Cuyahoga Falls is one of the busiest cities I've ever seen, but together we're able to provide that backbone for this work to continue on. As you can probably tell, I like a good analogy, so I just want to wrap out this point by talking about what this actually looks like. So now you know the 5 principles, so what does it look like, and why we decided to launch Rise Together now 2 years ago. Everybody in the world has a field or a pasture that they're used to playing in, and that comes with some fences. So that comes with things that you feel safe in, or things that you know, or things that are in your comfort zone. And if you take it from a business lens or a nonprofit lens, there are things that you do within your mission or within your business scope, right? We all have fences, and fences are great because they keep focus and they get us to an end goal, but they also create some limitations. And what we have found is that collective impact and the approach that we take allows people to understand their fences and slowly break them down. And so instead of having just one pasture to play in to come up with solutions, we have wide open fields. And breaking down fences and breaking down comfort zones takes often a very long time, to the point that sometimes people get bored or sometimes they get uncomfortable. But what I'm so proud of, and having seen happen firsthand in Cuyahoga Falls, is that those fences really do start to come down, and people start to realize where they're blocking back their innovation, or where they're being maybe more judgmental than they meant to be, or not open to a group the way that they once wanted to be. So open fields is really why collective impact works, is because you get them to change hearts and minds and break down those fences. I will say, and I've said this to our group a lot of times, is you have to trust the messiness. And I'm very grateful. Rise Together is a for-profit, for-good company, and we take an approach that a lot of for-profits don't, which is sit in the messiness until you get to the solution, versus sometimes I see people go in and say, we got to do this in 6 weeks or we're not going to get the deadline. When's the last time you changed someone's entire perspective on something in 6 weeks? It doesn't happen. So we always encourage people to trust the messiness, because taking down fences is not a clean or quick process. And we do it through these 3 ways. We do a lot of learning, thinking, sitting in the unknown, months worth of doing that, months worth of understanding what newcomers go through. Then we transform those new thoughts into ideas, and then those ideas turn into community action. You spend the majority of the time at the very beginning and the lesser time at the end. Good little Einstein quote here. When we build collective impact coalitions here, we really sit in that 55 minutes. If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes about the solution. I personally have seen firsthand in my own life and the work of Rise Together that if you don't commit to that 55 minutes in this particular space of work, you are not going to see systems level change. You can apply theory and sort of program structures to any community to try to make them more welcoming. But if you don't change hearts and minds, which is going to take a full 55 minutes, then it's not going to stick. And I believe in this to my very core, and I believe it to my very core because it's been the story of my family. So this is my beautiful family. I'm the youngest of four. This is on the farm that we grew up on before we sold it. And I've spent my whole life sort of being this kid that is thinking of things that are out of left field or having opinions that are not necessarily the same of my family or where I'm from. But I have been dedicated to, for who knows what reason, always getting my family to still sit at the table with me. And so I would share stories and I would tell them something new I learned. And I would never force them to have the same opinion as me. But I would watch over time as my parents, who didn't see anybody who wasn't white until their 20s, because that was Nebraska back then, I watched them change their perspective in ways that I am still moved to this day. My favorite part was when I told the Berlin story about working with refugees to my parents. They didn't say anything to me. I just said it, let it sit, and then we just left it. Fast forward to Christmas that year, I go to the Southern Baptist church I was raised in, and someone comes up to me, beelines comes up to me and says, you know, your parents were telling me about when you were interacting with the refugees. And I got to tell you, there was a moment where I was like ready to be in the defense because I thought they were going to be saying something in opposition of what I felt and believed. And instead, this woman who's known me my whole life says to me, and you know, after hearing your parents talk about it, it made me realize we probably could be doing a whole lot more. I wonder what we can be doing from here. And that is when I believe so deeply in the power of sitting in a problem for 55 minutes, because if I forced it down my parents' throat or my siblings or anybody, they would never get to where we want to go. They would never still be sitting at the table and trying to be a part of change. And so I believe in academics, I believe in research, but I believe that if we're going to bridge between research and practice, we have to remember that sometimes people need 55 minutes to change their hearts and minds. And I love my family dearly, and they are living proof that you can teach an old dog new tricks, I guess. But I want to open this up, and I've seen some great questions here. I want to just share this quote I share with every single time I speak because it's so important to me, and it's why we named Rise Together the way we did. It's by Lila Watson. If you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And I think that we all are trying to solve very big problems in the world. And if we can just get people to sit at the table and stay at the table, our solution is probably somewhere in the middle. And with that, I'm going to pause because I'm very eager to hear what other folks have to say and to open this up for a discussion.
So Aaron, share your question.
Yeah, and I'd like to be able to clarify this if I can too. So my question is, based upon your travels throughout the world and experiencing these other cultures where you have this sense of community, where people are raised and grow up in this sense of not being isolated in the human experience, coming back to the States, do you find that people generally speaking feel a lack of belonging? And if so, what do you think are the consequences or repercussions of that sense of isolation? And two, what do those who immigrate to the U.S., what do they have that we can benefit from their culture and integrating into our own?
Yeah, that's a great question, and very timely, because some of you might have seen this, but the United States, our new health crisis is actually loneliness. And so in January of 2022, a study out of Harvard came out that said that the physical repercussions of loneliness are as significant as smoking. And that what they started to realize is that we've had all of these medical or health crises in our country, from addiction to obesity to smoking to whatever it might be, that we put tons of resources towards. But the root of the problem was often loneliness. And so we were sort of, putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound in the country for so long. So Aaron, thank you for the question, because I think it's spot on. And maybe we're finally opening our eyes to it, that as a super individualistic society, we have become too obsessed with the singular instead of the community. And I'm very lucky and grateful because I was raised in small rural America where we are more like other countries in that sense. You have to take care of each other. There is more of a community base. But the moment I left, things changed. And I often tell people this, I had more culture shock moving to New Hampshire for college than I did living in Italy, because it was just so significantly different than how I was raised and what I was used to. And so I do think we have a bit of a belonging crisis here in the country. And I have really loved this work because I think a rising tide raises all ships. And if we can get people to start creating communities of belonging and connection for newcomers, then everyone benefits, right? Even the American born. But no, you're spot on. I think that is a serious challenge that we have, and thank goodness everyone is starting to wake up to it, because there's a great podcast I'm happy to share with you all that is the Surgeon General talking about this and why it's super controversial that he's bringing mental health as the primary medical crisis in our country. But I for one, am very glad that we're living in an era in which loneliness is being taken seriously.
And
Thank you for the question.
That's
great.
Yeah, and my thoughts as I've been traveling is, I'm curious about your thoughts. Belonging is maybe a global issue in different ways. What I have found is that some cultures tend to embrace people and bring them in. Like, so I'm in South Africa, and all of a sudden, before you know it, I'm like treated like a family member and brought in and that kind of thing. However, I'm wondering about this notion of is this a global issue or a U.S. issue? And when I think about the immigration across Europe and the challenges, you think of Poland and how welcoming and open they were, and then you think of other countries that were not so, when Ukraine was when people were trying to get places. What are your thoughts about this program being more of a program that has transferability to other cultures, as opposed to it only being suited for the United States because we have a unique situation here?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've thought a fair amount about it. And some is because, my life is still in part in Italy. And I still am very close to my host family and spend time there when I can. And so my host family always asks me, could you move your business here? And where I landed on is a couple things. One, I'll just speak on behalf of myself as the founder. And there are some folks that work with me now. But I remember once in grad school, they were talking to us about where can you make the most impact, and to think really deeply about where you alone are uniquely situated to make an impact. And that was like a ding, ding, ding in my head of, don't be another white woman working in Europe to help refugees, because I'm not uniquely situated to do that. Where am I uniquely situated? It's to go back to the Midwest where I was raised. And I hadn't lived in the Midwest for 11 or 12 years at that point. And so when we prospect markets, we exclusively did Midwestern markets, because to me, that was a place that I was uniquely like the iceberg, the culture iceberg, some of you might have seen. Though I look more New England now and sometimes sound more New England, I'm still super Midwestern. And so I needed to go to a place that was where I could serve authentically myself. So that's the long answer of saying, at this moment in time, I'm focusing mostly on the places in which I think that I'm uniquely gifted to serve. But I don't think that this model is exclusive to the US. I think that there are many places that could benefit from this. I will say it is a little bit harder in other cultures. This wouldn't necessarily work in Italy, for example, because they are pretty bureaucratic and pretty old school. So to get somebody new coming in like me and trying to talk to the mayor of a city or the county executive and get this moving would not happen the way that it has in a year and a half in Ohio. But the problem is I wouldn't say universal, but it is a lot more widespread. And if you would bear me 1 second, I'll share a quick story that I've been reflecting on the last few days in particular. Is we hosted a Congolese Day, which is another part of the work that we do in Cuyahoga County. And we had 311 Congolese community members come through to this event. And all things considered, I am completely different than all of them, right? They've been born and raised in refugee camps. They haven't participated in formal economies. Most of them are illiterate in their native language. Completely different worlds, right? And yet I felt a sense of belonging in a room with 311 of them during the day, more than sometimes when I go to like Chamber of Commerce events. And those are people who have everything in common with me in theory, right? So I do think that there are certain communities and cultures that are used to kind of swooping you in a little bit more than perhaps others.
break that down for me a little bit. And Sarah, I'm going to come to you in your question, but before we do that, I want to break that down. So you walked in the room, you felt a sense of belonging. So I'm thinking, okay, is it Tanya? Tanya loves culture, and Tanya knows how to feel comfortable in culture. Is that the same experience someone else would have? What did they do in that moment? What were they doing? What was happening, seen and unseen, that was going on that made that feel so connected and welcoming? Was there one particular way in which you felt welcomed and belonging?
Yeah, I think it's also fair to say, and again, those of you that know me, I'm an extreme extrovert. So we'll just call a spade, that like these environments energize me. And I know that. And the people I love in my life are introverts, and they often tell me that's overwhelming to me. So let's just call that as a baseline. Like, I love environments like that. But I think something that I see often is where are you on sort of this hierarchy? And I'll use my family again. I'm so grateful to how my parents, and my dad in particular, raised us, because he said it didn't matter if you're the mayor or the plumber or the teacher. It doesn't matter who you are. Everyone deserves your time. And that is how I was raised. And when you're around a bunch of folks from the Congo or the Democratic Republic of the Congo, that is exactly how they act. They don't care who you are, whatever. They'll ask you a question or ask you a favor or give you a hug. That it doesn't matter who you are. Like, I could be president of the United States and it wouldn't matter, right? They would still treat you the same. That's not always the case in some US contexts, because we do care about the latter. And sometimes I'll go into, I'm not any particular chamber event, but this happens in the business community a lot. And I walk into a room and you can see people are like, who is this person? Are they worth my time? That I think is an automatic, like, where my antennas go off about belonging is, do people see your humanity, or are they trying to map you on importance? And I think that's a super subconscious part of being a human that is kind of hard to describe until you feel it.
What's your favorite question or way of meeting someone that creates belonging? What would they say to you as you walked up, or what would you say to somebody?
I heard you ask great question. That's a great question, and I'm gonna steal that or borrow it if that's okay, for the future. Oh gosh, I don't know if it's a particular question, but it's always about you as a person. I can tell you the number one way to not create a sense of belonging is ask people what they do for work or where they went to school. Like, that is the number one thing Americans do to immediately put you on I'm going to determine your value based off of your success. But I love when people ask, like, where's home for you? And it allows people to answer what they think home is. And if you talk to newcomers, sometimes you'll get their actual home where they were born. Or other times you'll get, we just had this at the career fair. Someone said, oh, I think Cleveland's more like home now. So where's home for you? And always looking people directly in the eye is another sense of belonging that I find we are very uncomfortable with as people. That's a short answer. I'm going to think about that, though.
Yeah. And what's interesting when you said that, and Charles has something, and we got Sarah, and we got to wrap up here, and we got a lot of good stuff. There was a conversation, it's on YouTube. I loved it. It was a conversation about a young man from, I think it was the Congo or somewhere, that came over to play basketball for the UNC Tar Heels. And he's playing on the court, and the assistant coach was giving him so much grief to the point that he sent him out of practice. And because he was being disrespectful and this and kind of stuff. And so Coach Dean Smith at the time went to him and talked to the young man. And the young man said, I'm from a country where we don't look at people in the eyes. And Dean Smith went to that coach, put him on a plane, and flew him to go spend a week with that kid's family. And changed everything about how he viewed that. So I think also, like, so when you said look in the eyes, I think it depends, right? It depends, right? How do we look at each other? So I think that's really kind of an interesting story. I love that. Charles wants to talk. I'm so glad to see you, Charles. I was wondering if you would take your camera and put it on. So it's really good. So welcome. So real quick, who are you, and what would you like to ask?
I'm Charles Hubbard, and I'm a serial entrepreneur. But one of my missions in life is probably what Tanya said. Are we doing things to make profit, or are we doing things to solve community and help community? those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. But as I'm sitting here and listening to you, one of the questions and I apologize, I joined 6 or 7 minutes late. As the journey that you're on, what is the true path of what you're solving here? And because as me, again, when you look at the room that I'm in, I don't get intimidated that I'm the only Black man in this room. Because it is a product of just living. We're not comfortable in the skin. Like you said, you might be more comfortable in Italy than in your own community because some of you're an extrovert and most of the people in that room is introverts. But what are you solving? And what I'm really just trying to understand, I like the mission. I understand the mission. But if I needed to be an entrepreneur, got 40, 50 employees, started a tech company, how can I take what you're doing and merge it into how can I assist or help, or how can you help me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. And I'll say it depends on the community is the starting point, right? Because again, there's a difference between inclusion and belonging. So we come in to meet the local workforce needs and to build a workforce of the future depending on each community. So let's use Cuyahoga Falls as an example. Cuyahoga Falls has so much to offer, and in terms of what are their open jobs and what are their available resources, it makes most sense to be building a connection for international students. So folks who have master's or bachelor level degrees are English fluent for the most part, and are looking to build a life here. So would move into nice apartments and enjoy coffee shops and bars and music. Great, check plus. This is a great way for us to be connecting maybe a tech company that's looking to hire a bunch of data science folks and programmers to the work happening in the Falls. On the other hand, in Cleveland, we're not even talking about international students because they've got an insane amount of social projects or social nonprofits and resources. So we're focusing exclusively on the refugee community. So how is it that we're building or putting those pieces together, tightening that web so refugees can be resettled in Cleveland and connected to employers? Those employers typically are ones that we get them to be flexible on language, and they hire people sometimes without any English base. And they'll hire like 5 or 6 of them at a time. And that way they're able to have cluster hiring and one person translating for the group. So it really depends on where you're at and what jobs you're looking for on how we can help make that connection. One thing I always like to be really clear with folks is we once thought we wanted to be a program. So I say we because I had some co-founders when we first started this, and we thought we wanted to be a workforce development program. But then we looked around a little bit and realized there are so many nonprofits and so many workforce development programs, but what's missing is the connection. So we don't provide direct programming on the long term. We provide the connecting of the dots and running of pilots. So to reiterate my answer to you, Charles, is it depends on what community and if you are looking for the same types of people that the community is able to welcome and support. But ultimately, the thing we're solving is the need for workers. Yes.
Well, if I can just add to that, I live on the lake, so I'm from Cleveland, and I have business all the way out to Akron, to the west side, to Ashtabula. One of the things, if to answer your question, I'm welcoming, and as long as somebody could translate. So if there's an opportunity to give opportunities for people that are struggling, this is an opportunity. Hey, if there's an opportunity, I want to have that conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, and feel free to reach out too, and I'm happy to share my information if folks want to have a follow-up conversation. Our direct clients are governments because it needs to be a community-wide effort to be building a welcoming workforce, because employers can't do it all. Like, you can't provide the English language supports in the school and the support in the workforce and make sure that they're in safe housing. That's why you need a coalition, because everybody's got to give just a little. But yeah, please reach out. Would love to connect. And I just want to comment really quickly on something I saw in the chat about it also needs to be winning seats and feet 100%. I think that when you change hearts and minds, then people are willing to do the action themselves more sustainably. If I wanted to do this scalably and just like make a difference really quickly, it would be a completely different model. But because I want this to be long-term culture change is why we work so hard on the hearts and minds piece. I know we're at 3 minutes, so Dr. Caddy, which question would you like me to get at?
You're on mute, Steve.
So Sarah, why don't you help us wrap up? Is there anything you want to reflect on? Any final question you want to ask?
Yeah, I'll not so much ask a final question, although I'll just note that for me, one of the things that, as I put in the chat, that's so important is about work is about meaningful purpose, and whether that's a volunteer position or a paid position. I have a lot of experience working with individuals who live with disabilities, and I see firsthand how important that really exemplifies how important that purpose is, and things that we often take for granted have such important purpose for people who sometimes have greater challenges cognitively or physically or emotionally than maybe others of us live with. But, I think that that's very important. And that's one of the things that draws me to what we were doing in the workforce. I think that what strikes me about your talk today, Tanya, and I've thought this before, having known you and worked with you and been part of this process, is that you really, for me, bring together a lot of the things in my life that I find so important, whether that's about culture or work or connection. Empathy is very important to me. Just bridging those differences and connections so that we have kind of a shared humanity. And I definitely would encourage anyone on the call who's not familiar with what you do to really get to know you. I said I could connect you and Charles because I have contact information for both of you, and I can do that. And we did have some different folks on the call today from different worlds that aren't always on our symposia. So it was really nice to have a diverse group, not just from the academic world today. So thanks for being the catalyst to bring that together. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful too. I by no means thought I would end up here. Especially, I always wanted to work with helping a sense of belonging, but I never thought I'd be a for-profit business owner. And I think it's when we can bridge sort of our passions with what the world needs, that's when something quite magical happens. And so I'm thankful to get to have these conversations with groups like you all, as much as with a bunch of CEOs or community leaders or newcomers themselves. I know we're at time. I just want to end with just 2 quick notes if I can. The first one is just to give you an idea of what's coming down the road for the work of Rise Together. So the Cuyahoga Falls work is on the tail end. But if you're interested, please reach out to me or Sarah, and other folks from the coalition are on the call here. We are starting the Summit County work, so building out this coalition that will be doing this at scale across the entire county. We are running a program in Cuyahoga County with a bunch of nonprofits in a collaboration right now. And then we've got a few other interesting things happening that I can't say where, but in Northeast Ohio, as well as one in New Jersey. So if anyone's in Jersey and is interested in this work, please reach out. I do think that there's a special moment in life in which you realize the thing you care about most can help you pay your bills and also change people's lives. It's a very beautiful combination. So thank you all for letting me be here, and please connect if there's anything at all. And yes, I'll happy to share my slides. I saw that in the chat as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Tanya. Hey, everybody, have a great rest of the day. I think Dave Ferron said it well. He said, I have to go. This made my day. It was really nice. So as you leave, what's maybe a gratitude in the chat for Tanya as you leave? Just type a little thank you, something to let her know how you were impacted, something you appreciate. And, I really like the story of taking a need and turning it into something that can be served. And your idea of happiness from the Japanese concept really is important. I think when you have the convergence of those 4 pieces, it's nice. I call that joy, professional joy. That's how I do it with our doctoral program, is when people are able to make a difference while they're sleeping through the written word, and then create a professional brand around the work that they care about in a way that enables them to do the work where they want, with whom they want, making a living. It's really a wonderful moment to pause and say, man, this is great. I'm really blessed and fortunate to be doing this important work in the world. So thanks for everybody being here, and have a wonderful rest of the day, and bye for now. We'll see you soon.